Race bikes. You've seen the debates online. A 600 is so slow until you rev it out, and then it will still only go like 186 miles per hour. That's only good for beginner riders. Any serious motorcyclist needs a leader bike for more usable power down low. Plus, birds aren't real, and there is a cabal of satanic cannibals that govern our country. Are these the standard ramblings of a deluded cave dweller, or is there a kernel of truth in this sentiment? It seems that the merits of the 600 versus 1000cc motorcycles are often debated by motorcycle jocks who are obsessed with comparing spec sheet girth in the digital locker room. While seemingly arbitrary to the layperson, these motorcycles greatly vary in the riding experience. 600 versus 1000cc is a debate worth exploring further when considering the best application for each class of motorcycle. Do you want to go twice the speed limit in first gear or second gear? Is the consumer just a pawn in the greater system where manufacturers have to sell homologated race bikes to the public in order to compete in certain production class motorcycle races? If you reach redline in 6th gear, will your dad finally say he's proud of you before you perish in a glorious wreck as if Icarus traded his waxen wings for a Jigsaw thou and reckless operation ticket? Well, let's find out. Before we get started, I want to shout out our awesome community over at yammynoob.co. I will talk more about that later in today's video. Make sure to click the notification bell so you'll be alerted every time we drop a knowledge bomb, meme salad, or wrenching session. We upload daily 9 times a week, so you're not going to want to miss out. All right, here we go. 600 versus 1000s. For today's purposes, we're talking specifically about production sport bikes like the R6, R1, ZX6, or CBR 1000RR. These race bikes all typically have inline 4 engines, although I will talk a bit more about race bikes with other engine configurations later in the video. 600cc inline 4 motorcycles are known for having to be revved out pretty far on the rev range before you start to feel a majority of their power, some worse than others. A smaller 4-cylinder engine can continue to be revved really high, so you see them making peak power as high as 14 or 15,000 RPM. These high-revving 4-cylinder engines will make less usable torque than, say, a parallel twin or a V-twin motorcycle of similar size because of the configuration of the engine. For example, an R6 with its 599cc inline 4 makes a peak 43 foot-pounds of torque at 11,000 RPM, and with the R7 with a 689cc parallel twin makes a peak 48 foot-pounds of torque at 6,500 RPM. While the R7 has a slightly larger displacement, it makes significantly less peak horsepower than the R6, based predominantly on how high the inline 4 can continue to rev out. While the configuration of the twin engine with fewer and larger cylinders with a longer stroke leads to more torque down lower in the rev range, they cannot rev as high and continue making power like a 4-cylinder can. A 600cc engine is high revving, has lower torque figures, and peak torque and horsepower come both very high up in the rev range. A 1000cc 4-cylinder operates similarly. An inline 4 won't make peak power early in the rev range either, but it is available at lower RPMs because there's more ample power on tap. For instance, the 998cc Yamaha R1 makes peak 83 foot-pounds of torque at 11,500 RPM. So when you're lower in the rev range, you'll still have the amount of torque equivalent to what you'd have at 11,000 RPM on an R6. The power delivery operates the same way. An R1 makes a peak 200 horsepower at 13,500 RPM, so it isn't to say a 1000cc engine makes its peak power at lower revs like a big V-twin, but because there's so much damn power to begin with, there's plenty on tap even when you're lower in the rev range. How much power is remaining dormant up top is up for debate, depending on how and where you ride. Even the most skilled rider won't be able to make use of anywhere near all of the leader bike's power on public roads. And even if you're a track day rider, it is debatable if having a 1000cc bike would make you faster than a 600 on the track, depending on your skill level, despite the fact that a leader bike has way more power across the entire rev range. Skill is a big factor. Bearing all this in mind, a leader bike is arguably easier than a 600 to ride on public roads, considering just how far a 600 needs to be wound out just to get going. Is it worth it to have more usable power down low on a leader bike while knowing there is so much power left untouched at the top? Or is it more of your style to ride a 600 with the throttle pinned and know you're making use of everything the engine has to offer? I guess that is a decision you'll have to make between yourself and God. You know what's even better than a 1000cc inline 4? Well, it's an 1103cc V4, and boy, that is just the power plant that is living inside of our new Ducati Street Fighter V4S giveaway motorcycle. Giveaway motorcycle? You heard right, brother. giveaway, free 99. All you got to do is head over to yamanoob.co, sign up and join our community of motorcycle aficionados. Members gain access to our Discord server where we have a whole lot of fun chatting about all things motorcycles. Members get access to the YamCam live streams and contribute to contests for the YamCast. It's always a good time, and it's great getting to interact with our community members. Plus, you can win a motorcycle like our new Ducati. Seriously, don't miss out. Head over to yamanoob.co, become a member, and learn more. I'll see you over there. If this is a debate you're having, you may be an eager fast boy with dreams of tearing it up on a racetrack. The differences between a 600 to 1000cc motorcycle will be a little bit different on the track compared to everyday street use. A 600 will be like a little bit easier to handle than a 1000, having to rev so high to make power. You will not have to be as gentle with the throttle as you would on a leader bike. However, leader bikes also have a lot of TC and those sort of things, so there's something to be said about that. You can crack open the throttle and not worry about what it's going to do as much, if you're brave. Now, this becomes really apparent when cornering. A leader bike is going to be more susceptible to lifting the front wheel or losing traction at the rear when accelerating hard out of a corner, which can potentially lead to a crash, although a lot of newer motorcycles have rider aids to mitigate these situations. The general consensus is that for amateur track riders, a 600 may be faster through the corners and easier to control than a 1000cc motorcycle, while a leader bike is going to be a lot faster on the straights. For my money, a 600cc Japanese sport bike is the best bang for buck track day learning tool and racing tool. Something like an R6 or a ZX6 is going to get you so much mileage on the track as you learn with it, evolve with it, and it's not going to scare you shitless like a brand new R1 would. Basically, nobody needs an R1 on the track. The guys who own those are basically just trying to flex and are usually slow-ass B-group riders anyways. Let's take a closer look at some other common 600 and 1000cc motorcycles so I can illustrate the differences. Honda has been producing the CBR 600RR as their middleweight sport bike since 2003. The current generation has a 599cc inline 4 that makes 100 horsepower at 12,500 RPM, pathetic, and 45 foot-pounds of torque at 10,600 RPM. It has fully adjustable suspension, weighs in at 410 pounds wet and ready to ride, and costs $12,000 without ABS. Alternatively, the Honda CBR 1000RR has a 998cc engine that makes 186 horsepower at 12,000 RPM and 75 foot-pounds of torque at 10,600. If you were to look at a dyno chart for a CBR 1000RR, you would see it as making around 100 horsepower at 8,000 RPM. So you will still be finding the equivalent of the max output of the CBR 600 way lower in the rev range while still having plenty of power left up top. The bike also weighs just a scant 20 pounds more than the 600, coming in at 432 pounds, and the 1000 has a few key features like selectable torque control, electronic steering dampener to make the extra power easier to handle as well. The CBR 1000RR costs $16,499 without ABS. But you'd have to be a Honda rider, and that's kind of worse than death. Kawasaki has the Ninja ZX6R as their 600 class sport bike, a darling in my opinion. It has the 636cc inline 4 that makes 134 horsepower at 13,500 RPM and 52 foot-pounds of torque at 11,000 RPM. The ZX6 is one of the most contemporary packages in the segment, has fully adjustable suspension you would find on a race bike, but also has quite a bit of tech like multiple rider modes and a quick shifter. The ZX6R weighs 430 pounds wet and costs $10,999, which is a bargain in my opinion. ABS is an option as well for $1,000, but you won't want that on the ZX6, trust me. Kawi also has the ZX10R as their 1000cc super sport motorcycle. It has a 998cc inline 4 engine that makes 197 horsepower at 13,000 RPM and 84 foot-pounds of torque at 11,500. If you haven't caught on by now, these bikes kind of follow the same pattern. The 1000cc counterparts have so much power on tap, it is easy to access it early in the rev range. The ZX10R has plenty of tech to help keep you shiny side up like engine brake control, launch control, cornering management, and traction control. Plus, it comes with some fun stuff like a quick shifter up and down. All of these features don't come without a trade-off though. The ZX10R weighs 456 pounds, making it one of the heaviest bikes mentioned thus far, and this motorcycle has an MSRP of $17,199. I don't want to bore you guys, so I'm not going to mention every single 600 and 1000cc motorcycle available. I trust you are all picking up on the typical differences between these two engine sizes. Inline 4 motorcycles rev high and makes most of their powers down at the top of the power band, so a 600 will feel kind of gutless down low, while a 1000 will have a little bit more grunt because of all the power and torque it's making from the increased displacement. So even when a 1000 is revving lower in the power band, it's still making significantly more power than a 600. Since we understand this, let's look at a few different motorcycles that don't necessarily fit into this exact paradigm. My personal track day weapon is Triumph's Daytona 675R that I've race prepped and actually competed with in 2020. This bike is a little bit different for a couple of reasons. It has a 675cc engine, not a 599 or a 636 like you see in the 600 class from the Big Four. And secondly, it has an inline 3-cylinder configuration as opposed to the inline 4 you find on 600cc motorcycles. This configuration gives it a unique power delivery compared to other motorcycles like it, having a little bit more usable power across the rev range. It makes peak 128 horsepower at 12,500 RPM and 55 foot-pounds of torque at 11,900 RPM while weighing in at just 405 pounds stock, although my Daytona weighs in at about 365 pounds wet and ready to ride, has a flash and a full exhaust, and is probably making close to 125 wheel horsepower at this point. The engine has a very, very linear and predictable character to it, and it is absolutely amazing to ride on track. If you ride a Daytona, you know. Or you have a motorcycle like the Suzuki Gixxer 750, which was originally designed for the now defunct 750cc class of motorcycle. The Gixxer 750 strikes a balance between 600s and 1000cc motorcycles, and to many old heads, it is the bike of choice. It has the same inline 4 configuration you'd find in the Gixxer 600 or the Gixxer 1000, but with a 750cc engine. In its most modern form, the Gixxer 750 makes 148 horsepower at 13,200 RPM and 64 foot-pounds of torque at 11,200 RPM. So literally, it is completely splitting the difference in power between a 600 and a 1000, and has been a good motorcycle for riders who want a little bit more grunt than a 600, but don't quite have the appetite for 200 horsepower and a super heavy crank. That's the big thing that people don't talk about with the 1000cc motorcycles. They have a very heavy crank and don't feel that good side to side, in my opinion. Lastly, there are V-twin or V4 engines, or L-twins, I think we're going to be talking about Ducati. These engine configurations will also affect how and when the power comes on, as they operate differently than an inline 4. The Ducati Panigale V2 has a 955cc L-twin engine that makes 155 horsepower at 10,750 RPM and 77 horsepower at 9,000 RPM. These power figures might not be as high as normal leader bikes, but the power comes on much sooner in the power band with a broader torque curve and is a much narrower motorcycle as well. This more accessible torque has often worked in Ducati's favor throughout their racing history, or if that doesn't cut it for you, there is the Panigale V4, which has an 1103cc V4, not a 1000, I know, that makes 210 horsepower at 12,500 RPM and 91 foot-pounds of torque at 11,000 RPM. This engine configuration seems to give Ducati an advantage in just about every way, more peak power while simultaneously happening earlier in the rev range. This similar configuration can be found on other bikes like the Aprilia RSV4, as they utilize the same advantages of the V4 engine on the racetrack. Alright guys, thanks for watching the video. I hope you're able to get a better understanding of the 600 versus 1000cc motorcycle debate and determine which option might be the best fitting for you. Be sure to subscribe if you enjoyed the video and click the notification bell so you'll be the first to know about the next one. And trust me, I know people will be arguing about 600 versus 1000cc bikes until the heat death of the universe. Just remember, they all do 186 miles per hour. Weird. Fact: before Google launched Gmail in 2004, Gmail was a free service on the Garfield website. Garfield Mail operated from 1998 to 2001. Goodbye.